Glad to have you here. Welcome to the Sunday Night Potluck. For those of you who have been following our work at the Center for Biblical Unity, last Monday we did a conversation with Scott Klusendorf on our channel, on our show, All the Things. And I followed that up over the weekend with a blog post. So if you want to go check that out, you can. The day I realized I'm not actually pro-life, which might be kind of a little bit of a shocking title, but I explain what that means in the article. It is a little longer of an article, as you can see there. It's a 12-minute read, but it is basically my attempt to try and chronicle the journey that I've been on over the last couple of years in researching what is happening within the pro-life movement and how we are, as Christians, standing for the unborn, the preborn, and diving deep into understanding what I call the three streams that are fighting for the preborn. I try to explain the streams and what they are, and I know this might be a new conversation for many of you. Then I have a section on the divide of what is dividing them, and they are deeply divided. You used to be that you'd think that standing for the preborn and the lives and dignity of the preborn is a pretty straightforward endeavor, but it has become quite divisive and complex and nuanced. And so you can read that section. And then I summarize where I stand and where I'm still wrestling. So I hope you find the article helpful. I'm going to put it in the description so that you can find the article if you're watching it on the replay, or as I like to call it, the Monday morning leftovers. But I do hope you'll check it out. Been getting a lot of good feedback on social media about it, and the conversation is new for a lot of people. Some people have only heard snippets and have appreciated just kind of how I'm organizing things and giving people a crash course for what's happening. A really quick update. I haven't been doing my normal podcasting of my teachings, more extended long form teachings, because I've been writing a book since I started it in about mid-April. And I finished the manuscript probably on the last day of July. And now it is in the developmental editing phase. I'm hoping to have that done by the end of the month. And who knows, maybe I'll have it out by the end of the year. I'm going to most likely be self-publishing, but I will make the big announcement of what it's going to be about and all of that jazz a little later this year. But my hope is to get it out quickly. And I hope you're going to enjoy it. I hope that you'll want to buy it. Not only buy it for you, but for your family and friends, especially the young women in your life. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what the Lord does with it. So please pray for me. Writing a book always invites its own spiritual challenges. I find that it is a time of a lot of spiritual warfare. And so I would appreciate your prayers for us and for Monique and I and for the ministry. That would be very lovely and appreciated. Okay, let's get on with the prelude, the opening prelude. And again, this is the Sunday Night Potluck. This is sort of my homage to my childhood and going to church on Sunday nights and singing the hymns. And so I always like to have a little hymn. So I hope you enjoy this one. It was one that we sang at church a couple of weeks ago. And I hope you recognize it and that you enjoy it. Anyone recognize this one? And Can It Be? The lyrics are on the screen if you're watching the video. Okay, that's a good sampling of And Can It Be? And if you don't know, And Can It Be was written by Charles Wesley in 1738. It is one of the great hymns of the Methodist movement and has had so much enduring value. I appreciate this hymn. Like I said, we sang it a few weeks ago at church, and we attend a service where they still sing the old hymns, and always really appreciated that one. I think those singers were in Africa, just judging how they pronounce some of the words and how some of the women were dressed. I'm gonna take a guess that it's a church in Africa. So this is definitely one of my favorites. I hope you enjoy those. I always get so many comments about the hymns, how much people enjoy them. So I enjoy selecting them and sharing them with you. Yes, Amy, the hymns from the Bible Belt Baptists were different. They are. They are different. We've had a couple of those on the Sunday Night Potluck too. Then there's a lot of different kinds of hymns for sure. Okay, I want to talk for a few minutes in this opening segment about cultural renewal, social transformation, taking our country back, Christian nationalism, whatever you want to call it. Those are all different phrases for kind of a similar idea. And I want to talk about that tonight in the first segment, because I think that if you have a vision for cultural renewal, social transformation, taking the country back, trying to return to traditional values, whatever you want to call it, and you don't include true conversion, actual conversion to the Christian faith, gospel preaching, church attendance, your project of cultural renewal will be built on sinking sand. This is my big idea. This is my big proposition tonight. And a while back, I did a short interview with a gentleman named Dr. Joe Boot. And I outlined in that video kind of two different visions for cultural renewal. And this is a drum that I keep trying to beat, that I really want people to understand that there are a number of different models out there in the public space in among Christians who are all engaging in a competition of ideas for what is the best path forward. How do we engage in a project of, as Kim says, returning to sanity? How do we do that? How do we engage in a project of social transformation? And on that discussion with Joe Boot, I actually shared a graphic that I made with the help of ChatGPT. It outlines here two approaches. Now, these are not the only two approaches to cultural renewal. These are just two approaches that are kind of archetypes that are out there in the public space, in having public debate with the competition of ideas. And Joe Boot's approach is on the left. And So you can see here the result is cultural renewal, and his is more of what I call a bottom up approach. And this is where it leads with the gospel. And gospel preaching is here at the foundation. You can see number one. And then there's discipleship and church planting, godly families. These all have cultural influence, and that's what leads to cultural renewal. Now, Stephen Wolfe's approach in his book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, is what I'm characterizing, to the best of my ability, a top down approach. This is more like institutional takeover first and then working its way down. Now, I don't mean this to be exclusive, as if Stephen Wolfe doesn't care about gospel preaching or church attendance. He does. He's a Presbyterian. I'm not trying to say that, but his idea of cultural renewal is more starting at the top, if I've understood the project correctly. And then as the culture becomes more Christianized through laws and policies, then that sort of acts as a form of pre-evangelism that then people come into conversion and evangelism and discipleship. So these are two of the competing models that are out there today. And I want to, in particular, kind of revisit this idea by watching a clip from the Jeremy Boring show where he's talking to Rod Dreher. This is from a couple of weeks ago. It's an interesting. Jeremy Boring is an emerging podcaster in the conservative space. I believe he's a Christian. He was also the co-founder of the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. And then he was fired a couple of years ago. And now he's kind of doing his own thing. And he has a podcast that is definitely emerging in popularity. And so he did an interview with Rod Dreher. Rod Dreher is an interesting guy. He is an Eastern Orthodox Christian. I believe he used to be a Protestant, and then he was a Catholic, and now he's an Orthodox guy. But he lived in Hungary for a number of years. He's just recently returned to living in the United States. He's living in Alabama, I think, in the Birmingham area now. And but he has some interesting insights as an American who was living in Europe. And so I want to play this little clip and discuss it. So we're going to start with a discussion of some of the dynamics of what's happening in the online world of young men coming into Eastern Orthodoxy. And I've been in an on again, off again dialogue with someone in my life whose son has been fascinated with Orthodoxy. And what I keep telling the mother is online Orthodoxy and the Orthodox apologists don't necessarily reflect the life in the local Orthodox parish. Like what you're seeing online on YouTube is not normal. It's not the normative of what you're going to see in your everyday Orthodox parish. So that's kind of where they're starting the conversation. All right, let's pick it up there.
I keep hearing from Orthodox priests, it's my own church, that some of these young guys are turning up because they've gotten turned on to Orthodoxy by watching something online. They show up expecting to see white people at prayer, or they want to hear anti-Semitism, or they want to hear some form of racism or a sacralized racism, and the priests have to deprogram them. Yeah. Like this ain't what it is, guys. And we're happy that they're showing up, but they show up thinking they know everything there is to know, and they want to fight. I'll tell you this, though. I had a conversation.
So that's kind of the first little bit. It's kind of interesting, though, I thought, because he was saying basically a very similar thing that I've been saying to my friend is, look, the online Orthodoxy, Orthobros, apologetic space is interesting, it's entertaining, it's educational, but it is not the normal friendly neighborhood Orthodox parish or priest. It's you might see these outliers on YouTube, but that is not what you are going to encounter in your, like I said, your local parish by and large. I mean, you might find an outlier, but it's kind of different. And so anyways, I just thought that was an interesting observation. It's kind of similar to what I had told my friend, because the average Orthodox priest is not a groyper. They're not even groyper sympathetic. Okay. The average Orthodox parish doesn't look like the ortho world on Twitter. Okay. Let's keep going here. Rod has some other kind of interesting observations.
With a Catholic Zoomer convert who told me that the core thing that all pastors and priests need to understand is the church, broadly speaking, is in a fight now with vitalism. What does he mean by vitalism? With a general philosophy that worships strength and excellence, the pagan virtues. He said, if the Christian churches don't figure out how to speak into that hunger, young men have a legitimate hunger for being able to do something, for being strong, then it's going to lose. But this sort of moralistic, therapeutic, feel good Christianity, a boomer style Christianity, it's not going to cut it. And that's something where lay people of our generation, as well as pastors and catechists, have got to confront.
So I thought that was another kind of interesting point of an observation. Rod Dreher is not the only one to say that, but I mean, Dreher is not some fringe Christian nationalist type, but he is encountering this concern. And even he is bringing it up that young men want strength and they feel like going to church is more like therapy, and that there's this longing in Gen Z younger men wanting something that portrays strength and vitality and excellence. And I had to look up the word vitalism. That was a new word for me, but apparently it's kind of a nod to pre-Christian virtues. And I don't know enough about it to really comment on that, but the big picture of what he's saying on this issue is that young men have a concern that the local church just seems like therapeutic softness, and they are wanting to reject weakness and egalitarianism and other forms of moral therapeutic deism and kind of feel good forms of religion. Men need a mission. They need something to fight for. But what questions came up for me is I wonder how much of this is correlated to the reality that so many young men are growing up without fathers. I saw a statistic today that like almost 40% now of children are born into single parent homes. And it made me wonder, like, what is the impact of a significant part of the culture, the generation, not having fathers present in the home? Like, what is the long-term impact of that? And does that play into this longing for strength and vitality and wanting a mission? And so maybe they don't have a healthy way of knowing how to accomplish those things. We don't really go out and fight wars anymore. In some cases, now we're seeing that protecting women will actually get you arrested because our justice system is so upside down. It's peculiar. And there's a perception by some people in the Gen Z generation that Christianity does not project strength or courage or excellence. And so I don't think that that's historically been the case. But if you have 1/3 to 30 to 35% of the, or maybe even 40% of males growing up without fathers in the homes, that's going to have an impact. That they don't have a concept or a role model of what good or even godly manliness looks like. Historically, Christian manliness was about ordering itself and subordinating themselves under Christ. And there's this idea in scripture about God's power is made perfect in our weakness. And we look to Christ because um, he's an example of humility to us, but we can kind of in a good, vigorous male vision of that, we can picture in our minds, how to order faith, hope, and love in such a way as to still engender strength and courage and excellence. But now a lot of those virtues have become so feminized that I think some young men are struggling, like, how do I live like Christ but not just be a totally weak man? And so there's some level of internal conflict that's happening there, which I thought was kind of an interesting observation. Now, in transparency, I was talking to my pastor about this, and I said, do you notice this among the young men in your church if they come to you about this issue? He's like, no, he didn't even know what I was talking about. He's like, no, I've literally never had a young man come to me with these concerns. But I've received enough letters at the ministry from moms who notice these things in their sons. And so I do think that this mindset is out there among some Gen Z men, and that they are struggling. And so put in the comments what you're noticing in your household. I'd love to hear about it. Do you think that Dreher is raising a good point here, that churches need to speak into this more, or is he just making too much of it? Okay, now let me play this one last clip here where he talks about his experience in living in Hungary. And this gets us to the part about Christian nationalism and talking about power and those dynamics. So let's hear what Dreher has to say about that.
Is hollow. This church that we have built not only stands for nothing, it actually stands against you. Trying to solve that as a political matter, though, I don't think can possibly. The church can't be restored by way of politics.
No. And that is one of the most important things I ever heard Viktor Orban say. Orban was a reformed Christian.
Now, for those of you that don't know, Viktor Orban is the former president or prime minister or whatever the head person is of the country of Hungary. He just lost the election a few months ago and has transitioned out. But so you're going to hear Dreher talk about Orban here, and that's who he's talking about from his days of living in Hungary.
I don't think can possibly. The church can't be restored by way of politics.
No. And that is one of the most important things I ever heard Viktor Orban say. Orban was a reformed Christian. And when he said famously or infamously in 2014 that he was trying to build an illiberal democracy, I mean, they all condemned him. But what he went on to explain is, I want to build a democracy that doesn't accept what liberalism has become in Western Europe. I want to build one that prioritizes a traditional family, does not accept gender ideology, and that is based, however loosely, on Christianity. And the Constitution the Fidesz government passed in 2011 acknowledges Christianity as the basis for all laws, even though it also provides for religious toleration. It's a very liberal democratic constitution. Anyway.
So notice here what Dreher is laying out. This is basically the top-down approach that I was talking about earlier of that version of Christian nationalism. And this is, to me, more resembling the Stephen Wolfe version of Christian nationalism, of this kind of top-down approach where we change the institutions and we create kind of this cultural Christianity that acts as a pre-evangelism toward getting people to come into the faith and that sort of a thing. So in a way, like, I think what Dreher is saying is Hungary's already run this experiment. So let's hear how this turns out.
That
Wait,
sounds very liberal for an illiberal
right,
democracy.
right. Yeah. But as Orban said once, he said, people look to politicians for meaning. He said, I can't give you meaning. I'm a politician. I can give you things, by which he meant he could pass laws, he can give subsidies, whatever, use policy decisions to open up the public square so that the meaning giving institutions, institution of the family, churches, synagogues, schools, etc., can do the work they're supposed to do. But, he said, if they don't step into the space opened by politics and do their work, then anything politics accomplishes will be swept away. Well, that's true. And Hungary is now, under this new government, living through that. They're sweeping everything Orban accomplished away. And during the whole 16 years of Orban's rule, the churches, the Catholic churches and Reformed churches, they continued to decline. People in that country just didn't go to church.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference.
So even
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting little section about Hungary. And I think in Stephen Wolf's vision, his hope is more of a what he calls the Christian Prince, of more of an autocratic type of government, but it's similar in that, it's putting the structures in place to encourage biblical, traditional Christian values of the West, if you will. But I thought that Dreher's comment about church attendance is so interesting. And now basically everything that Orban did for 16 years is being swept away quite quickly. When we keep arguing about, what do Christians do in terms of power? And I think that the conversation about Christian nationalism, and again, I want us to be aware that not all people who are engaging in a conversation about social transformation, cultural renewal, taking our country back, trying to preserve Western values or Christian nationalism, those are all phrases for a similar project, but they go about it different ways. There's an essay on the Center for Biblical Unity website on Christian nationalism where I explain kind of what I see as the 5 major streams of that project, where there is a lot of public debate about how do we go about a project of social transformation and renewal. But all of this assumes that there's going to be power involved, that we're going to elect people and put them in power some kind of way to enact laws and policies. But what I don't hear a lot of people talking about is what happens once you get in power, but your churches are still empty. And that is really the experiment that Hungary just ran. Whatever you want to call it, cultural renewal, social transformation, Christian nationalism, without true conversion and church attendance, I'm kind of a skeptic that change model will be long lasting. You might be able to use the top down approach temporarily, but I don't know if that's really going to provide long-term cultural renewal. In my view, social transformation is a 2-front war for the Christian. And the first front, I agree with Joe Boot on this, that the foundation of it has to be preaching the gospel. And then preaching the gospel leads to invigorated churches and church planting and stronger families and discipleship. And that then has a salt and light effect to bring us to the second major pillar of social transformation, which is bringing God's standard of justice to the nations. I think you have to have both and in that order. Start with gospel preaching and then bring God's standard of justice to the nations. I think we need to do both of those things in the public square. It's not a one or the other, it's a both and. If you drop one of them, I don't think that the cultural renewal can be long lasting. You need both. And I think that as I've reflected on this more and more, and I thought the Hungary example was an interesting one, that when you only have top-down changes and social policies at the top, but your churches are still empty and there's not gospel preaching, it won't be sustainable. That was an interesting example to me. Yes, Canon Press is coming out with a book on 5 views of Christian nationalism. That will be interesting. Boy, if you'd asked me 10, 20 years ago, is Al Mohler going to be on a stage shaking hands with Doug Wilson? I was said, no way. No way that's happening. The world has changed, my friends. It's so interesting. So, yeah. So those are some thoughts about that. So put your thoughts in the comments about if you saw the Dreher interview or if you had any thoughts about it and what those thoughts were and your thoughts about social transformation. Okay. In the second segment, I want to do a little bit of a longer conversation and build on a discussion that I did a few weeks ago about the problem of unqualified elders. I got so much engagement about that. And I went over this idea. I had this graphic of 10 kinds of men who should, let me see if I can get a better view of it here. Let's see if this works better. Sorry, I'll clean this up later. There we go. That looks pretty good. 10 kinds of men who should not be elders. And we went over these qualifications. They should not be drunkards, violent, domineering, quarrelsome, greedy, arrogant, or overbearing, a recent convert, a chronic womanizer, doctrinally unstable, or passive. And we talked a bit about why these things are important and the importance of having biblically qualified elders. And I wanted to dive now even deeper on these issues because I keep saying on this channel that I think the most important thing you need to look for in a local church is good elders. You need good elders because someday you are going to need support. Someday you are going to be in a situation where you need the help and support of the local church, whether that's because you're in a situation where you're in a difficult marriage or your child is deconstructing or you have a child who's incarcerated or a husband who's incarcerated or just you get cancer, your spouse suddenly dies and you're a young widow. Like you are going to be in a situation where life is going to happen. And I am trying to get you to think ahead and plan for something. Planning ahead is a biblical concept, okay? And I have been beating this drum for a few years now on the channel about the importance of elders and why I believe that good and godly elders are the foundational component to a healthy local church. Now, I know that some people, when they look for a local church, they're looking for good preaching and good worship and the Kidmin ministries and Bible study groups. And I would say that all of that stuff is downstream of good elders, okay? Biblically qualified elders. When you walk through difficult seasons, you do not want to navigate those hardships alone. You are going to need shepherding, okay? And so all of those other things can be good preaching, good worship, kid min stuff, Bible studies, but all of that is downstream of the elders. I'm going to keep beating this drum, all right? But all of this is foundational to what I want to talk about today. And that is, I want to talk about abusive, or what I call oppressive, marriages, and how I see elders as being an important part of aiding those families who find themselves in that situation. According to just basic statistics, 1 in 7 marriages qualifies as abusive. Now, let's say that that number is inflated, and I don't know how they're defining the word abuse. Let's just say that that number is a little bit high, but it's still a significant number. Let's say it's 1 in 10 or 1 in 20. Okay, let's say the number is wildly off. All right, but even if it's 1 in 20, all right, that's still a significant number in, let's say, a church of 100 people. That means you have potentially 5 families in your church of 100 people that potentially are in an abusive marriage. That's not a trivial number. And for those people, they are counting on their elders for help. And we need to be thinking about, how are we going to handle this? Because here's so this is gonna take me a while to kind of walk us through this and talk about it, but it's something I've been trying to work up to for quite a while. Because when someone comes to their pastor initially, because they're in we'll call it a difficult marriage for right now, that pastor has to do a lot of things very quickly sometimes. And it is not always easy to differentiate between different kinds of marriages. I have found it helpful over the years to think about, there's normal marriages that have seasons of ups and downs and challenges with health issues and minor disagreements, but we're all kind of still functioning and rowing in the same direction and working through our problems, and there's repentance and apologies, and we're all kind of going in the same direction together as a family, and things are generally good. That's normal marriages, okay? It's not marriages without hard times. You can have hard times, but you have the wherewithal and the emotional fortitude and the spiritual maturity that you can get through those hard times, and, through different seasons of life and in life's normal ups and downs, and it's okay. All right. So that's normal marriages. Then there's what I call difficult marriages, and think of these as like on a spectrum. Okay. There's difficult marriages, and these are the kind of marriages that have deeper structural, more long-term conflict. Things like misaligned values. All right. And those could be a lot of different things. It could be misaligned values in how you spend money, how much debt you feel comfortable managing together as a couple, somebody's spending habits, religious differences. One, you got married when you were both Christians, and then one spouse is deconstructed, or you got married when you were both not Christians and one person became a Christian, or one person converted to a different religion. There are deep differences that can lead to long-term conflict in a difficult marriage. Parenting differences, parenting styles. Maybe one parent feels strongly about gentle parenting and the other doesn't, and wants a more confrontational approach or accountability. Okay. So that can lead to long-term structural conflict, in-law problems that don't seem resolvable, and you're on different pages with each other. But even in a different difficult marriage, there's still this common goal that we're walking together, we're working towards solutions. There's generally respect and honoring of each other, but there's a recognition like we have difficult issues that are not likely to go away. Okay. These are not resolvable problems, at least not immediately. And that difficult marriages can be hard. And again, we're talking about a spectrum. All right. But then there are those people that are in what I call oppressive marriages. We might call them destructive marriages or abusive marriages. And I've been trying to kind of transition my own personal language against to stop using the word abuse quite so much, because the definition of abuse has become very peculiar in our culture. And I've been trying to shift my language to the word oppressive marriage, because that's, I think, more consistent with the biblical language. But that's just a personal journey that I'm on. But the word abuse has just become so incredibly confusing and can mean almost anything nowadays. So yeah, so that's just where I'm at. But these are the kinds of marriages, I'm call them oppressive or destructive, or we might in the world standards call them abusive, where these are situations where there is a habitual pattern of behavior. Okay. And I like to point to Galatians chapter 5. In fact, I'm going to just read those verses. So when I think of a destructive marriage, what I think of is things described in Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 to 21. It's what Paul calls the acts of the flesh. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, so chronic drunkenness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, people that are highly divisive. They like to argue, they like to get in an argument, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So when I think about an oppressive or abusive or destructive marriage, this description in Galatians chapter 5 is what I think of. And if you think of it as a habitual pattern of behavior, this is a type of person who is not a Christian. This is not just a oopsie. Okay. This is not just I made a mistake. This is somebody who is engaging in true lack of repentance. Not somebody who cries a lot, not somebody who says that they're remorseful and they're constantly apologizing and come back and give me a second chance, and then they're on their fifth affair. Okay. Or they're habitually drunk and, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's a lot of crying and all of that. But there's not a true change of behavior. This is somebody who has not come to repentance. All right. So we need to differentiate between drama and crying and statements of remorse versus actual changed behavior. All right. There's repetitions of pattern of behavior and actual changed behavior. Actual changed behavior is what the Bible calls repentance. So the first thing you have to do when you are in a marriage situation and you're thinking, hey, I want to get help, I want to get support, and I want to go see my pastor. It might be helpful to just think like, what is my situation? Am I in a normal marriage where I am just kind of going through life's normal ups and downs? My husband just got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I'm in a season of really not knowing how to cope with that. I need some help. I need some support. Okay, that lets me know the type of support that I need. Versus a difficult marriage, like, is there long-term structural conflict? That's going to be a different level of support that you are going to need. Or are you at a part of the spectrum where you are dealing with an oppressive and destructive marriage? Okay. So if you're going to reach out to your elder team, let's say, for support, the first thing you have to know in your mind, or at least try to begin to have an awareness of, is where am I on this spectrum? Because when you have problems, our tendency is to isolate, to think we can handle it all by ourselves. And that's really where, like, the devil can come in, and it can become very depressing. We feel very alone, and we're in maybe a destructive or abusive or oppressive marriage, and we don't know how to reach out for help. We feel very isolated because we don't maybe even know that we're in a destructive marriage. Or let's say you're in a destructive marriage, but then you go to your pastor and he recommends, hey, go to this marriage conference, go to this marriage reconstruction or renewal conference, read some self-help books on marriage. Well, if you're in a destructive marriage, that's not good advice. Like, this is why it's important for your pastor to actually know you. All right. Because the same advice that can help someone in a normal marriage and in some difficult marriages, like, let's read some self-help books about how to communicate better or how to be more respectful and honoring of each other. Okay, let's go to a marriage conference and hear some speakers on how to do some things better in our life, how to have a better intimacy or whatever from a Christian perspective. That advice can be helpful if you are in a normal marriage and if you are potentially in some kinds of difficult marriages. But that advice can be very destructive and add orders of magnitude more difficulty and more destruction if you are in an oppressive or abusive marriage. Okay. Normal advice doesn't apply when you are in this third category. You might think about, okay, we have problems. Maybe we need to go to therapy. But what, a therapist. Yeah, that's what I need. I need to go to a therapist. Now, personally, I've become very skeptical of referring people to therapists because I see that a lot of them are actually destructive to families, and they've been trained in school in such a way as to give really bad advice. And the models that are taught now a lot of times are not about preserving families and enduring difficult relationships. It's more about coaching people in how to cancel people in their life, and it's weird. But let's just say you have a good therapist, but then you have to know, like, well, what are my goals? Like, why am I going to therapy? Well, you're going to choose a totally different kind of therapist if you're in a normal marriage, and let's just say you're in a season of, I'm trying to figure out how to cope with poor health or aging alone as a single person. And I'm facing some emotional challenges with that. All right. Those are, because I'm a widow, like those are situations that normal people go through, and you could go get therapy for, and you could get a kind of like talk therapy and all of that. But if you are in a destructive or abusive marriage and you just go to your average run-of-the-mill therapist, and you are married to an abusive person who's very good at lying, a normal therapist might not work. That might not be the best thing for you, because you are trying to get normal people advice and have normal people's coping skills when you need a more serious level of intervention. And people who are more in the Galatians 5 types of descriptions, sometimes they are masterful liars. and they can go to normal therapists and lie, and then you're in a destructive marriage. You need an intervention at that level. Okay. Now this brings us to the local church scenario. Let's say you don't know your pastor. This is the first time you've ever reached out for support because your marriage is in trouble and you are going through some difficult times. And let's say that you are really like, hey, pastor, we're in trouble, or we're going through some hard times. We need help. And you're standing there in his office and he's just meeting you, or he's only casually just shaking your hand after church. But you show up in a crisis and this is the first time you've ever engaged with him in a significant way. And he doesn't know both of you, and he hasn't observed you and how you guys communicate with each other. He needs time to ramp that up. He can't fix those levels of problems in 50 minutes. And this is why so many pastors farm out counseling to therapists, because they're like, I don't have time to meet with these people. But the ideal is that you are knowing your pastor. You are getting shepherding on a regular basis, that he knows your ups and downs. He knows your pattern of communication. He might even know your spouse, your husband's pattern of communication. He knows and loves both of you. He wants to be at stake for both of you. And he can help discern, am I in a Galatians 5:19-21 kind of marriage? Am I in a dealing with a man or a wife who is a habitual liar, a habitual drunk, an unrepentant adulterer, a porn addict? Like, what am I dealing with here? Am I in a normal marriage? Am I in a difficult marriage? Or am I in a destructive marriage? These are important questions. And if you go to your pastor and this is the first time that he's ever really interacting with you, you're in an emergency triage situation, because more than likely you've waited in isolation before reaching out for help. And now you're reaching out for help. Well, this guy's got a lot of ramp up that he's got to do before he can really help you guys. And again, this brings me back to something I just really want to emphasize, that normal advice for helping to preserve a marriage in a difficult season can actually be destructive for people who are in oppressive or destructive marriages. Different marriages need different kinds of advice. And so when you are dealing with somebody in the marriage relationship who has habitual sin, maybe both of you have habitual sin, maybe both of you have different sins that qualify in Galatians 5. I don't know, but there is a pattern of habitual sin that is destroying trust or putting one of the people in the marriage in danger. There is a different game plan that is needed than if you are in a normal or difficult marriage, and you're just needing help in coping or walking through a season. But your pastor, if you're meeting with him and he's a godly man, he's not a mind reader, and he isn't automatically going to know enough to be able to discern in 50 minutes whether you're in a normal marriage with a difficult season or you're in a destructive and oppressive marriage. He's going to need some time to get to know you. And this is why having proper shepherding, being known, and having godly leadership is so important. A healthy church, I saw this graphic a few weeks ago on X. I thought it was so good. It was shared by a gentleman named Jason Kovacs, who's in kind of the integrative biblical counseling stream. And I'll try to describe this for the podcast, but basically there's 3 spheres of a healthy church. There's the organizational sphere, which is leadership, systems, and stewardship. There's the developmental sphere, which is discipleship, growth, and equipping. And then there's the relational sphere of trust, care, and belonging. And it says in the center is the healthy church, and people are known, formed, and sent. And this is like the ideal world that doesn't exist anywhere. But it gives you kind of a North Star of what to think about. And you want to have healthy, biblically qualified leaders. You want to have discipleship strategies in place where people are growing in their faith in the local church context. And you want to have relational care and trust as well, and a sense of safety and belonging, and that you are cared for. All of these things go into forming a healthy church. And obviously the problem is not all churches are healthy. We live in a sinful and fallen world. But when we have become so dominated by the senior pastor model, where the main function of the elders is just to rubber stamp the opinions of the senior pastor and whatever his vision is for the local church, and we put nice men into leadership, businessmen, doctors, psychologists, white-collar professionals, because they're successful, or a church that has no elders at all, both of these scenarios can eliminate proper accountability for the senior pastor, but it can also let sin just sort of run amok in the local church because you don't have biblically qualified elders and there's no system of accountability. And when you don't have godly men who are in leadership, that's when women and children get hurt. When you have nice men, rubber stamp men, when you have men who are weak and passive, this is when women and children and the vulnerable get hurt. And I think that you want to go to a church where there are elders, where you can be known. And these are people that you want to go to when you're in the middle of a life crisis. Now, that's not to say that they're going to be the all-encompassing solution, but going to your local church should at least be like one of your first stops when you're in a life crisis, okay? Like, can you call your pastor if you get in the hospital and he's going to come pray for you? Do you know people, if your child gets into the psychiatric hospital and you're having problems, are the elders in your church, is one of them the kind of person that you can call when you're in the middle of a life crisis? Yes, we need elders who can preserve sound doctrine, but we also need elders who can help to adjudicate the truth, who can work to help us resolve our disagreements and discern whether we are in a difficult marriage or a truly oppressive marriage. If all we have is yes men who want to rubber stamp the senior pastor, the weak and the vulnerable are going to get trampled. Because it is not always easy to tell the difference, but what kind of marriage you're in. But you are going to need good and godly men to help you discern that. And that is the scenario in Matthew chapter 18. All of this groundwork that I've been laying on talking about elders and godly leadership and all of this is all very eminently practical, because the scenario that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 18 is one where you have good and godly men who are trustworthy, not perfect men, but good men, godly men who are biblically qualified. They're discerning. They can look at evidence. You're going to need that, because there might be a time when you need help adjudicating what your situation is. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you need somebody to tell you what to repent from, but you also need somebody to tell the other person what they need to repent from, and that they aren't fooled by a habitual liar, someone who is very good at fooling people. You need somebody who can see through that. Now, again, this doesn't mean that I think that church elders need to be the ones who do all the counseling. You might need other resources to work through some of that pain, but you do need some leadership, some help, some support from your leaders who are willing and able to walk a road with you to help you, pray for you, help you move. If you are in a truly destructive or oppressive marriage, that they will help get a team of men to come over to your house and help you pack boxes and move to an apartment if you need to get to safety. If you need money for helping you with that transition, if you need help paying for a lawyer, our friend Han Cho, we had him on the show on All the Things a couple of months ago. He talked about his experience as an elder in a local church where they were called upon to adjudicate an abusive marriage, and they didn't do a good job. And that had a devastating impact on that woman and her children. And now he has a foundation where he works to help protect women who are the victims of destructive marriages, oppressive marriages, so that they can get out of those marriages. If they need financial help, first and last month's rent to get an apartment or to pay for an attorney, this is the kind of work that Han and his wife do at their ministry. And so this whole thing about elders that I am trying my best to explain is kind of an interconnected idea of why so many of our churches, in my opinion, are unhealthy, why so many of our people feel lost and uncared for and lonely. And it's because we do not install biblically qualified elders. We don't know God's standards of how to adjudicate truth, and we cannot define destructive and oppressive marriages correctly, and consequently we often don't know how to identify them. And so we leave people in vulnerable situations where they are not getting the help and support that they need to get to safety. Now, again, I don't think that every difficult marriage is toxic or abusive. Some difficult marriages are very difficult, and they can be difficult for several years. But in general, if you're both still committed and trying to go in the same direction together, a difficult marriage can be survived, and it can thrive, and it can transition into a normal marriage. It is hard. Again, this is a spectrum. Difficult marriages sometimes can go the other direction. They can become more and more destructive and oppressive over time, especially if there are things present like habitual adultery, 3, 4, 5, 6 times of adultery. That's not an oopsie. That's a pattern of behavior. If you have somebody who's a serious porn addict, and porn addiction leads to other emotional problems and destructive behaviors such as anger and that sort of thing, like, these are patterns that need to be addressed, and you need godly men to help you address them. Okay. And of course, this whole conversation is really connected to the larger issue, or connected issue, I guess I should say, of repentance and forgiveness. And I've covered all of those topics on my channel. I have a 3-part series on Matthew 18 and fixing our distortions about forgiveness, so you can check that out. And I will link to that in the description as well on YouTube. But I wanted to kind of finish out that discussion about elders, because this is a vital and important issue. If we want to understand what is going so dreadfully wrong in so many of our churches, and why people are struggling and unhealthy and we're having abuse issues, this is kind of my working theory about that. And health begins in the local church, not with good preaching, not with good worship, not with a good kid ministry, not with a good home Bible study group. Health in the local church, I think, begins with healthy, godly, biblically qualified elders, and all that other stuff is downstream of that. All right, friends, that is it for this week. I hope you found these conversations helpful and that you'll share this. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. And if you find my work helpful in your personal life and your spiritual growth, please consider partnering with me at the Center for Biblical Unity and the work that I do each and every day to help keep me deployed in full-time ministry. I am so grateful and appreciative of all the people who help give to the ministry toward our salaries so that we can continue to do this research and do what we do at the Center for Biblical Unity. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to say grace and peace. Good night.